Hey everyone, this is Alan, and in just a few minutes you're going to hear me say, hello everyone, this is Alan, and in just a few minutes you're going to hear an interview that I did with Catherine Machiniak and Steve Axford. Did you follow that? Okay, well here's the deal. I will be saying that because I do introduce the interview, but the interview goes far longer than I thought. And that's a good thing. I expected to be able to cut some of this out, but as I've gone through it very carefully over the last 3 days, there really hasn't been anything I wanted to cut out because I think it'll interest you. So I'm going to split this into two and put the first half out right away. The second part will come out as soon as I can get it edited, which at the rate of 3 days per hour, which is not that bad, it'll be 3 days from now, or thereabouts. So enjoy part one of my discussion with Steve and Catherine. So that's all I have. I will turn it back over to me and I will take it from here. Or he will. One of us will. Somebody will. Hey everybody, this is Alan. In just a few minutes, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of Australians that you really need to know if you don't already. Steve Axford and Catherine Machiniak. These are two motivated, bright, brilliant, artistic people, and they work together fantastically. They are truly a powerhouse in Australian fungal photography, but I'll let you see that for yourself. This is a fairly long video, and I'm leaving it that way because this was a fairly long conversation, and it was a long conversation because we were having fun. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys make all of this possible. If it wasn't for you, conversations like this simply wouldn't be happening. So thank you very much. I do appreciate it. So with no further ado, let's head down under and meet Stephen and Catherine.
When it rains, everyone else goes inside, then I go out into the rainforest, because the rainforest is at its best when it's raining. You see the most beautiful things then. And the best time to photograph mushrooms is when it's raining. This one's, it's about 1 centimetre from the base of the stem up to the top, so they're very tiny mushrooms. It's a mycena, which generally speaking means it grows on wood. It's got these fine hairs growing all over it, and the little water droplets collect on the hairs. This one's an icicle fungus. It's found that in Victoria. It grows in thick clumps on a dead tree stumps and things like that. Yeah, this is one of my favourites. It's a type of truffle, and this is the first time it's been discovered in Australia, and it's bright blue. It's about 2 centimetres across. It's the sort of thing you see on the path and you think that someone's dropped a bit of blue plastic. It's so bright. It's a stunning mushroom. Anything that's that colour. Blue is a very unusual colour for mushrooms, and that one is particularly blue. These are my other favourite mushrooms. These are the luminous mushrooms. These ones are really bright, that if you've got to pick up a stick with a bunch of them on it, you can see your way at night by them. These ones, I'm not sure what these ones are. They're local mushrooms, local to Northern Rivers, local to me. I haven't really had it identified, because mycologists are extremely rare beings in Australia, mycologists being those people who study mushrooms. Yeah, this is one of my favourite mushrooms, Hygrocybe graminicolor, I think. But it's a green mushroom that grows in green moss. It's extremely difficult to find. That one I think I found, and when I was kneeling down getting a photograph of it, when I got up I found that I was kneeling on a whole bunch of them. But they're such a beautiful mushroom. This is a special one. This is Pixie's parasol, but this one had the water droplet underneath it with the 2 air bubbles in the water droplet, tiny mushroom, but so beautiful with that water droplet underneath. A lot of people think I've got a fungi fetish, but I think people, if they start coming, if they wander around with me and start looking at the fungi, a lot of them actually develop a bit of a fungi fetish as well. It's a contagious thing because it's something that's there's so much of it around us. If you just walk through the forest, particularly when it's wet, you see all these different colours of fungi. There's reds and greens and blues and yellows. So they're quite beautiful.
Well, I am delighted to say that after a lot of fanfare and hoopla, I'm finally sitting down to talk with two of the most well-known fungal photographers on the planet. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Mr. Steve Axford and Catherine Marchinia. Hi, Steve. Hi, Catherine. Welcome.
Hi, Alan.
It's morning there. Good morning.
It is good morning. I know. I was trying not to confuse people with the time warp.
Well, initially, when we started talking about this, the idea was that we'd try to do this live. And having done a couple of live interviews in Australia with Australians in Australia, it's just not worth the heartache of getting it all arranged. Somebody's sleepy whenever we do it. So whereabouts are you in the world? Where is home?
We're in northeastern New South Wales. If you look at a map of Australia, about halfway up at where the easternmost point of Australia is Byron Bay, which is just down the road from us. A similar climate to Florida.
Oh, really? We have hurricanes every 20 minutes now in Florida.
We have floods every month here in Lismore, so it is very similar. Both areas are pretty much at the front line of climate change. So we had the most devastating flood in February this year, which was 14.5 metres. Not us personally, but our community, and the CBD of Lismore just doesn't really exist anymore. Like there's 1 in 20 shops have got someone in them.
Are you at sea level?
We're not. There's an old volcano that erupted 30 million years ago or something. And so there's a lot of basalt hills and an old caldera and very rich soil. And we've just got a cat turned up. So we'll remove the cat from the video gear.
Did you move to where you are now because of the habitat being so friendly to funguses? Or is that how you became interested in funguses? And there's the cat.
Okay, that's it, Poppy. Your starring role is over.
Oh, I guarantee that there'll be some fans of Poppy from now on.
No, well, I came up here completely incidental to mushrooms. In fact, when I did come up here, I thought that there weren't going to be very many mushrooms because I was already into mushrooms, but I thought, oh, well, if there's no mushrooms, there's no mushrooms. The reason I thought that was that no one reported on them from up here. So there was no obvious mushroom collectors on the internet. There were lots of people doing it down in southeastern Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, Tasmania. Beautiful mushrooms there, but I wasn't aware of tropical mushrooms in particular, those mushrooms that turn up in summer rather than in autumn. So I came up here and it was quite a surprise.
This is high summer for you now, is it not? Or getting close to?
Getting close to it, yeah.
We're just at the beginning of summer and we're just before our wet season. So we have a pretty, well, I was going to say reliable, but of course, things are changing all the time. But we have a wet season that goes late January, February, March.
If you're in the a climate that's similar to Florida, kind of subtropical, is that all year round fungus weather?
It can be. Winter gets a little bit cold for them because in the subtropics you still get a winter. Spring's usually too dry, though this year it hasn't been. The prime season is January, February, March, April, maybe May, maybe June, maybe July, maybe maybe any month of the year, but with the concentration in, say, February to April.
Which is kind of the equivalent to our springtime. No, it would be the end of our summer then, right?
It's the end of our summer, so add 6 months to it and you get what it'd be for you.
Probably Florida has a flush of fungi in the wet season as well in their summer, but most fungi seasons in the Northern Hemisphere are autumn, so...
Amidst all of the swamps that are around me down here, it's never dry. It's all the time. It's sopping wet down here. So their mushrooms grow out of everything, but they're all the same mushroom. What's with that? We don't have any glow-in-the-dark mushrooms or these blue or green ones, just mushroom-coloured ones. We're going to get into that because I need to understand that. Now, Alison tells me that you also are a slime mold photographer too, right? You go chasing after those?
Oh, well, you run across these things when you're photographing fungus and you look at them and say, what the hell's that? And then I learnt what they were, and I learnt they're slime mold, and mycologists have slime molds under their umbrella. Not because there's any logical reason for it, but because no one else wanted them. So they...
Right.
You know, one of the things that we've become probably more interested in, rather than photographing them, of course, is time-lapsing them.
Because they photobomb things. I'll be time-lapsing one thing, usually, always a fungus, and then a slime mould will go overwhelm it and eat it. I hadn't been expecting that, but slime moulds really move quite quickly.
Steve took this beautiful shot of a slime mould. What's that one called? That's a dog's vomit.
Yeah, dog's vomit. That's common here.
Yeah, that's common throughout the world.
Wow. Look at those things.
Well, the thing was that I took a photograph of that a day before, and it wasn't like that. It was just bits of slime mould with none of the dangly bits at all. And I liked it so much I came back the next day. I couldn't move it. It was one of the very delicate, so if it had been movable, I probably would have taken it home and time-lapsed it. The first one there, the intention was to time-lapse a slime mould. The frog jumping in, well, that was the frog's decision, and the little spider coming in and out of the hole there, I hadn't noticed that before because, of course, if you go near it, the trapdoor spider hides, only comes out when there's no noise or vibration around, and gets himself on video.
So
yeah.
we love the fact that these critters just photobomb our time lapses.
It's amazing. Oh, why are the mushrooms dying when the slime mold?
Well, the slime mold's going around and gathering free food, if you like. So if there are carbohydrates sort of floating around, presumably there are nutrients that the slime mold's eating and nutrients that are necessary for the mushroom to grow. The slime mold probably isn't eating the mycelium.
Over what period of time does a time lapse like that take?
Well, those are quite quick because the slime mold, when it usually goes in a matter of hours.
That mushroom didn't take 2 days to die after the...
Probably took a week or so to grow.
Yeah, it would have grown slowly, and then suddenly the slime mold comes along and whoop, it's gone.
Yeah, they move terribly fast. I mean, all things considered. You can't see them move though, can you?
You can't see them move, but if you go out and come back in 10 minutes, you go, oh, it's moved a bit. Which with a mushroom is pretty difficult.
Now tell me, what was it about mushrooms that got you started? I mean,
The colour.
that has to have a story.
You're going back to, 1998 actually. My then partner died of cancer. I got a life-threatening disease. So I was a bit miserable for a time. I went through chemotherapy and got out the other side and decided I really needed to get out there and do something. So I started bushwalking and exploring wild places by myself. So I'd go on these long bushwalks by myself. Though the photograph on the top of the mountain there is obviously taken by someone else. I ran into some other people munching up the mountain. So
So beautiful.
as I'm making my expeditions out, I came across this purple mushroom. I'd never seen a purple mushroom before. My view of mushrooms was probably similar to yours, things that grow in the field and you throw in a frying pan and fry them up and eat them. But nothing particularly beautiful looking, just fairly drab browns and greys and things like that. So to come across a bright purple one was something quite different. So I started looking for other mushrooms then, and surprise, surprise, I just kept finding more and more and more of interesting mushrooms. Gradually became hooked. I gradually, it took me a long time to really start learning much about them. Initially I categorised mushrooms on their colour. So I'd have red ones and purple ones and so on. Little did I realise that colour is possibly one of the worst ways of categorising anything, because colour can change. You can look at one colour in different lights and it comes out as a different colour.
And also in mushrooms, there's one mushroom that we've been tracking now for a decade, and it's blue, and we just found a pink one. Actually, it's down on Lord Howe Island, and a mycologist said to us when they test the DNA, because we said, we think it's probably the same species as the blue one, and the same genus as the blue one, and they said it may even be the same species. Maybe the colour is incidental. So, we just, until we find out, we don't know for sure. But it was an interesting comment that a mycologist made.
In your travels, is it your experience that mushrooms are like this only are found in the Pacific? In Australia? We don't have these, do we?
You do have colourful mushrooms.
I think you probably do.
I don't think so.
Well, we know for sure that there is a glow in the... Anyway, that's probably getting down a little bit, but there is a glow-in-the-dark mushroom in the States. We do in our fungi network, we have a fairly big following on Instagram in the States, and people do post some nice colourful mushrooms.
Well, they must be keeping them well hidden.
Old growth forests are a good thing to have with these mushrooms. And
by old growth, you mean hardwoods predominantly?
Well, it means the original trees have never been cut down.
Pristine forests.
So there's not a lot left. Certainly in Europe, there's very little left. I don't know, the United States, there's certainly some. But a lot of your forests are northern forests, so there's no reason why not. I think some areas you do get, so the Pacific Northwest in the United States, you probably get some.
And it does vary from place to place. Like we travel a lot to Yunnan, which we'll talk about a little later. Well, we haven't since COVID, but... and they have tropical rainforests there, which we spend time in. And interestingly, they have more of the mushrooms that are connected to the roots of trees, mycorrhizal fungi we call them, as opposed to, they do have the saprotrophic, which are the ones that recycle wood, but we tend to have much more, like the balance is different. They have more mycorrhizal, less saprotrophic in the forests that we've been in, and we have more saprotrophic, less mycorrhizal in our rainforest. So interesting kind of, we don't really know why. Might be the soils, might be...
Probably the soils. We've got very, very rich volcanic soil here, so possibly the trees can find the nutrient more easily.
So they don't need the fungi as much as on their roots. Yeah.
What would you expect to find in a swampy environment if you were to go hunt in swamps?
We don't go hunting in swamps a lot. I don't know that I like damp feet that much.
Crocodiles, mosquitoes.
Yeah, very rich in mosquitoes.
Lots of those. Well, that explains why I don't find any mushrooms.
We're planning another trip north to the tropics maybe early next year, so we can answer that question then.
But we see a lot of colourful mushrooms particularly in old growth areas.
How do you look for mushrooms? What is your routine? Is it an all-day thing? You go together, or you on your knees? And how does it work?
Well, around here we've got certain areas that we know are good mushroom areas, and you just have to keep going back whenever it's likely, because depending on the weather conditions, the two main things are temperature and how wet it is.
What's the perfect day to go?
There is no such thing as the perfect day. Well, I haven't managed to put my finger on it yet. That we'll go out after rain in general. Usually it takes a few days. We have rain here, but we also have rain events. I'm sure you have the same sort of thing where you'll get rain sort of pretty well for a week, maybe for 2 weeks or more. That's the time when you really get mushrooms. But most mushrooms like the temperature. Around here, most mushrooms like the temperature around 25 degrees centigrade, whatever that is.
Who knows? That sounds cold to me.
That's warm. Oh, well, warmish.
Warmish.
There you go.
So they don't like it over. They don't like it over around 34 degrees. That's too hot for them. So that would be about 90.
Yeah, 95 or
95 degrees. Which is, of course, why human beings don't have a lot of mushrooms growing inside them, because we're too warm.
Which is good.
Which is definitely good. Though I did hear somewhere that the average temperature of human beings is gradually declining. So at some point we'll hit the mushroom temperature
and fungal diseases will become a major issue.
I'm sure.
But interestingly, it varies a lot. So, this year we did a trip out to the Flinders Ranges, which is the desert area of Australia. So people don't think about deserts as having fungi, but in fact, almost all the plants in the desert rely on fungi to source nutrients and water. So even though a lot of that fungi won't create a mushroom, so that's the thing,
rarely create a mushroom.
It's there. It's just under our feet all the time. But we did locate a fairly classic desert mushroom. Well, it's a false puffball. It produces copious amounts of spores. My goodness, I've never seen a mushroom that produces so many spores, but I guess it's a survival mechanism strategy because it's a desert mushroom.
It's not an attractive mushroom, by the way.
No, it's not. A lot of the desert mushrooms aren't particularly pretty. They're hardy, but they're not pretty.
Yeah, if you're a mushroom photographer, the desert is not the best place for beautiful mushrooms. There are mushrooms there, and fungus is very important, but they're not really beautiful.
Oh, so this is only in Australia's arid areas, this mushroom. Oh, Podaxis pistillaris, that's what it's called. And there's variations of this theme in other places of the world, but this one is unique to Australia.
Had it been raining before you visited this spot?
It had.
So you might have a hyphal mass that extends over an acre and just have one or two mushrooms show up.
I think in the desert that's probably not likely. I think in the rainforest you can get huge areas that might be the same, but I think
But, we did see mushrooms in this area that were probably 4 to 6 metres apart that might have been
Yeah.
from the same mycelium because there was only one tree.
yeah, and you get an old watercourse when it rained, the water would come down that valley, so then maybe the mushrooms underneath, the water would survive underground a little bit longer than elsewhere.
But we were very pleased to find this mushroom because there's a beautiful photograph of a First Nations man in Central Australia holding this mushroom, and they used it for some medicinal purpose. So it was one of the very first recorded desert mushrooms in Australia.
Oh, it's a hallucinogen?
No, it's not. No, they used it for, I can't quite remember.
Not all mushrooms are hallucinogenic.
Very few of them, in fact.
My viewers are going to want a list, though. Oh, excellent. Now, you when you describe the way that a mushroom may be spatially separated from another mushroom, do you ever use your knowledge of what the mycelium does to actually look for the next mushroom? Do you ever follow the edge of a mycelium track?
Can't say we've ever really done that. We do, when you find a particular specimen, say that purple mushroom, then you will look in surrounding areas because they do grow in patches.
In our forests, we tend to find 4 different types of fungus. Primarily, we find saprotrophic fungi, which is the fungi that recycles wood, and
Or dead,
things.
yeah. The recyclers.
The recyclers of the forest. I love this photograph of yours, actually, where you can see the mycelium and the mushroom on a piece of wood, on the underside of a piece of wood.
That the cotton appearance, that's the mycelium. That's not a secondary mold or anything like that.
No, that's the mycelium of the mushroom. Most of the mycelium will be inside the wood, but sometimes it grows on the surface or even grows into the air like this one. And
These mushrooms at the bottom don't realise they're upside down. Nobody's told them, so that. How strange is that?
I always try to get, when I take a photograph or when I develop the photograph, I always try and get the mushrooms growing upward because it irritates me seeing mushrooms growing out sideways because I know they will never do this in nature. But then sometimes you take photographs from underneath them or whatever.
Whose idea was it to start looking over your head for the mushrooms? I mean, aren't you normally looking down?
Most of the mushrooms are down. But you'll see trees, and mushrooms growing quite high in the trees. It's rare that I'll actually photograph them, but...
In dead trees.
Yeah.
There's only a few mushrooms that seem to like growing on
Well,
Cytaria.
Yeah.
But they live around the root systems of living trees.
Yeah.
Well, now that brings us to the second type of mushroom. There's the saprobes or the saprotrophic mushrooms, which are the recyclers. And
Like
then,
the beautiful photograph of the Mycena viscido cruenta, which is, I just love this photograph because Steve left the leaf, there's always a temptation to do a bit of house cleaning. But I think on this particular photograph, leaving the environment, the leaf, with the red mushrooms was just makes that photo.
That's beautiful.
so you've got the saprobes, the ectomycorrhizal, which grows on the roots of trees and is in a symbiotic relationship with the trees. The fungus provides minerals, water in a lot of cases, all of those things that the roots of the trees can't get at. Like an average tree root might be 1 millimetre in diameter, and the mycelium or the hyphae from fungi is, I think, 5 to 10 microns. So we're talking about a big difference, and the fungus can get into rocks get into the cracks of rocks and extract minerals and provide the tree with minerals and water, and the tree provides the fungus with carbohydrates. And the tree will actually grow at about twice the speed with fungus than without. So they're very important. A lot of trees won't survive without them. Not all trees are ectomycorrhizal, but when you consider that things like pretty well all pine trees, all eucalypts, lots of the other than the temperate forests are purely ectomycorrhizal.
So the species of trees that have thousands and thousands, the genus of trees that have thousands and thousands of species are mycorrhizal. So that makes the planet very mycorrhizal, really.
Very fungus dependent. Do the fungi fix nitrogen for the trees, or is that done by bacteria?
Certainly the recyclers of the forest. There's been a lot of romantic stuff said about the mycorrhizal fungi, but really it takes both of them to create that forest environment, because the recyclers turn all that rotting matter into soil for the trees. So very, very important. And the other thing about mycorrhizal fungi is this whole notion of trees talking to each other through the fungus. And although
the wood wide web.
The wood wide web, and interestingly enough, I've always thought, because symbiosis is competition and collaboration. And a tree will dump a fungus if it's not doing what it wants, and a fungus will dump a tree if it's not doing what it needs. So, it's quite ruthless out there. It's not romantic at all.
And that brings us to the last type of fungus, which is the parasitic, which can be parasitic on trees or plants that...
What would be an example of a parasitic fungus?
Well, an Orpheocordyceps, a cordyceps, zombie fungus.
Ooh, dearie me. That's a bad place to have a cordyceps, isn't it?
That's a tiny little ant. And the next one is also a cordyceps. More strictly speaking, it's an entomopathogenic fungus. Means this one, it kills insects and the like.
Does it kill them quickly?
No.
Probably not.
No, this is real science fiction stuff.
So
horror movie.
On that photograph, when you zoom in on it, you can see that there's a network of webs of the fungus holding that insect onto the bottom of a leaf, right? So that leaf, that's on the bottom of a leaf. You turn up the leaf and that's what you see. And these are minute. Like this spider would be how big?
That one's probably a big one, 3 or 4 millimetres. The
And-
small ones are a millimetre or 2 or even less.
And so this has been a new revelation for us. We met a local guy through our fungi network who was clearing out weed trees, and in the process he was discovering all these little entomopathogenic fungi on the bottom of leaves, killing spiders and what else were they killing?
Caterpillars.
Caterpillars.
Anything that lives on leaves of trees. In fact, they use this in Asia to protect crops. We haven't become that sophisticated yet. They do it in a very unscientific way, but they gather these fungi and then spread them around their crops, and they get a balance. The fungus will eat the aphid, say.
Are the spores not everywhere?
Well,
There tends to be hot spots of them, like we go looking for these on our property and we struggle to find them. There's a couple of places where we find a particular one, but when we go up and look on Donovan's property, there's like this one citrus tree that he finds hundreds of them, different ones on. So the other fungus that we find in the forest is lichen, which not everybody thinks of as a fungus, but in fact it is a symbiosis between algae or cyanobacteria and 2 or more fungi, and we love lichen. We like lichen a lot, don't we?
lichen's terrific because lichen will dry out, and all you need to do to get it looking good again is add water.
Yeah, just add water.
So you can go to some place that's dry, pour some water on the fungus, on the lichen, and you'll get a beautiful picture.
That's absolutely... we don't have lichens like this.
Yes,
This
you
looks...
You do, you definitely do. You need to get your fungi eyes in,
I
Alan.
do.
Yeah, I remember being taught years and years and years ago that when you look at rocks, the surface of the rock is not rock. It's algae or bacteria or lichen. It's only when you freshly break a rock that you see what the rock is actually like.
True.
But it's quite different.
And lichen covers an estimated 6% of the planet, so I think you've got lichen.
I have lichen, but our lichen is boring. It's the same colour, and it just looks like, lichen. Let me ask you something, because people are going to be absolutely fuming at me for not asking you something about your equipment and how you set up these shots. We've got to touch on that before it gets too late in the day. Tell us about what camera you use, camera and lens, if you could.
It's this one, which is the Sony A7R4.
Nice.
Which is a 60 megapixel camera. So I'm probably one of those people who can really use those extra megapixels, because it effectively gives you added magnification. So this is a 1-to-1 macro, but I can get 60 megapixels on it, or using other third-party lenses, I can get up to 5x macro on it, which is effectively a microscope.
The 90 millimeter lens, is that your perfect macro lens?
I occasionally will try wider angle lenses for time lapse, mainly to give variety of the view.
Right.
But for out in the field, this seems to be about the best. In the past, I've used 180mm lenses, but it's good for insects, but not so good for mushrooms. You find you run into a tree as you're trying to get far enough away. So 90mm it's pretty good, actually.
Lovely. And you're a Sony you're a Sony ambassador, right?
Yes.
Congratulations. Prestigious.
They liked my pictures as well, apparently.
Yep, that's the idea. Excellent.
We should go over the rest of Steve's equipment.
We should. Let's see what you got.
I got a knee pad.
I've got one of those. It's a gardening knee pad.
Yeah.
We used to have
nice and lightweight. You used a little baby surfboard, kickboard for kids in a pool. Just something to protect your knees from the mud and sharp stones. But quite handy. Aluminium foil. This is our lighting.
Really?
So do you want that? Yes, really.
for stills.
You don't carry flash in the field?
No.
Oh, my goodness. Well, that's a surprise. All of these photographs that you take, the outdoor ones, you're doing this with natural light only and reflected.
Pretty well, yes.
That's incredible.
So tripod is really essential part of the kit. But in the rainforest, it's quite dark, so it's different for me because I'm shooting video, and video you're restricted in terms of your shutter speed. So I do take lighting into the forest. Depending on what I'm doing, I'll take the light that I've got an LED panel up here that I'll take in, but I've also got a whole lot of little battery-powered LEDs panels. They're only about this big, and I'll put them around the mushroom. And that will usually, with the A1 particularly, because the ISO is so brilliant, if I shoot on 1,000, anywhere from 800 to 1,000, I don't really like going above that because I think on a big 4K screen you can see the grain, but that lighting gives me enough because I'm working on a macro usually. Yeah.
Which panels do you use?
So I usually use the small ones. Yeah, so I take a track into the forest when I'm doing a lot of fungi for film. I'll take a little track into the forest. I take my little LED panels. If I'm doing anything bigger, then I'll take the large one, or if I can wangle a helper to come and help me carry some gear into the forest, or if we can park the car close to the mushrooms, then I might use the big panel.
Do you have a preferred brand for your lights? Because people are going to ask.
Well, I do like Lau lights just because they're affordable and they're lightweight and they have various panels. But the little ones, no, I just buy Chinese. We don't use dimmable lights because they're...
They dim themselves automatically
yeah,
sometimes.
that's right. You get a flicker.
And they flicker terribly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're controlled by current switching, so the current goes on and off rather than just goes down.
Yeah.
So they're a bit of a mess when you come to process them afterwards.
When you go out then for a day of mushroom hunting and photography, you're going with a camera, a roll of tin foil, and something to kneel on.
Tripod.
Not even a roll of tin foil. I usually fold the tin foil up to a piece about so big, put it in my pocket, and then I've got the camera and the tripod and the kneeling pad.
A whole roll of aluminum foil sounded funnier though. It really did. I could see. What kind of tripod do you use?
I use a Gitzo tripod. Now, Gitzo is horrifically expensive now.
Yeah.
And they don't make this tripod anymore. So it's the only tripod that I know of that has complete flexibility. Catherine's just bringing.
Oh, lovely. Is it the Mountaineer? What is the...
It was called a Traveller.
Traveller, yeah, right. And they've stopped making it?
Yeah.
They've stopped making it. You can adjust this so the centre column goes off. So you can actually get the camera sitting on the ground. So you can adjust it to virtually any position. Now, various people make something that's almost as good but not quite. I think Benro do, Newer do. There's possibly some others. I suspect Benro is probably one of the best at the moment. But this one's an old one. Its price when it was last selling, I think, was $1,200, something like that. You can buy an equivalent thing from Newer for 100, 150.
I'm not sure it's equivalent, but yeah.
Well, it's not too bad, actually. I've got one, and I've got to say, it's okay. Benro is... I haven't used the Benro one, but I've got plenty of Benro tripods, and they'd be okay too. But this Gitzo one, no longer made, unfortunately.
That's a shame. It's beautiful, though.
It is. We don't know what we're going to do when it...
That will probably last as long as we all will, I would guess.
That would be nice.
It's 10 years old, or at least 10 years old now. So it's getting a bit creaky in various areas, but it still works well.
Well, that is a big surprise to me that you're going out with so little by way of high-tech gear and getting photographs like this. Can we look at a few of your photographs and talk about maybe some of your technique, how you get some of these images, especially now as I know you're not using flash?
I won't talk too much about the mushrooms. This one, in order to get the beautiful gills, you know, they grow on little bits of wood, so you can pick up a little bit of wood and rotate it around so you can get an underneath shot. This is where the aluminium foil comes in, because you not only need an underneath shot, but you also need to get underneath lighting. So just a little bit of foil underneath the mushroom, cast some light up so you get that beautiful lighting effect.
You're not getting much light there, though, are you? In the forest?
Well, you can take You can take 30-second exposures if you want, though I almost never do now, because on this camera I'll up the ISO to 400 or 800, and you really can't tell the difference. Well, I can't anyway.
The problem with taking really slow images in the forest for a focus stack is that things can change.
Yeah, it takes too long.
Yeah.
If you've got a 30-second exposure, and I use noise reduction.
Oh, yeah. Right, my Nikon does that. It takes forever though. A 30-second exposure with noise reduction will take
Takes
minutes
a minute
to process. Yeah.
Well, it doubles the time, so 30 seconds, and then now I must admit I've never done a really accurate, tried to work out how effective this is, but I know it does reduce the noise. So I usually use that. So I don't want to take 30-second exposures, but I don't mind taking, say, 2 or 4-second exposures, because them doubled is, I go to 4 or 8 seconds. That's not a big problem. And the focus stacking, which is something that is absolutely necessary for this type of mushroom, that, say, these golden ones are probably a centimetre across the cap, maybe less, maybe a little more. But at that sort of magnification, you've got to have focus stacking. To get the thing in focus. You can have these, beautiful blurry images that might be visually okay once or twice, but don't show the mushroom properly. So you need the focus stacking, and I've found that few people do focus stacking in the field, except with cameras that automatically do it, which are coming along now, which is great.
But Steve doesn't take a track or anything like that into the field. He just manipulates the focal ring.
That is the correct way to focus stack on large subjects. I mean, if it's bigger than the entrance pupil of the lens you're using, you should use the focus ring. So that's why they're so good. But how many pictures would that be, Steve? 4, 5?
Most of them are, about 5. They vary a bit depending on how deep the field is and so on.
Do you ever use a focusing rail in the studio, for example?
When I'm taking really small specimens, say the entomopathogenic fungi, where you've got a fungus which is maybe 1 millimetre or 2, or something like that, and like a spider, it's got legs all over the place and it's as wide as it is high. And then I'd use the focusing rail and maybe even take 100, because you can. And it's always better to take more than not enough.
And we do, and like you, we use stack shots for that. We have, enough
stack shot
rails.
What do you stack using? Which program? Somebody's going to ask.
Helicon Focus is what I use. Now, I watched your presentation with Alison and talking about Zarine Stacker. I haven't used Zarine Stacker, but then again, I have most of the time now, I'll just take the stack, put it into Helicon Focus, and take the output. No adjustment whatsoever.
Quite different for me though, because the photography that I do in the field, I could never compete with Steve on fungi macro.
She hasn't tried.
I don't want to try. I mean, I think he does it just so well. I couldn't even go there. But what I do is, I used to do a lot of landscape photography in panorama. So I have an architectural lens, a tilt shift lens.
Shift lens.
And so I've introduced fungi because when we're out in the field, so I say I do landscapes with fungi, but I haven't come, Helicon Focus really struggles with that. So I usually end up going through each of the layers in Helicon Focus. So I do one stack in Helicon Focus, then I go through and just, touch up all the layers. And similarly with the next one, which is this beautiful bridge grown from a banyan fig tree in Megalia. And then there's just that little fungus on the left-hand side.
That's a fungus?
That's a Xylaria fungus, yeah.
That looks like an alien of some type.
So yes, so I could try some other focus stacking programs, but yeah.
We've got Helicon Focus. It works brilliantly for what I do.
Well, there's one thing you cannot argue with, and that is your photographs are breathtaking. So however you're getting them, you're doing it right. So
yeah, we only do a little bit of that because, quite honestly, they take too long. I can go out into the bush and, one stack, at best it might only take 5 or 10 minutes, and then I move on to another one. I've done in China, I think I've done 100 photographs in a day.